listening to Let's Get Surety. Let me hear your bonding talk with Kat Shamapande.
Hey everyone, it's Kat Shamapande. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Let's Get Surety. Today I have with me as a co-host NASBP CEO Mark McCallum. Hey Mark, thanks for joining.
Hey, terrific to be here, Kat.
And as our guest today, we're going to be talking about coping through stress during the pandemic crisis. You feeling stressed, Mark?
Just a little. I think I need some good tips.
And so to talk about that, we have with us the upcoming keynote presenter for the NASBP virtual event coming up on November 10th, Managing Stress and What's Next. And that speaker is Dr. Will Miller. He's got an extensive experience as a university professor, psychotherapist, stress counselor for police officers, and a stand-up comedian, in addition to being a keynote presenter. So we are happy to have you with us, Dr. Will.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and kind of what got you to where you are today?
Well, I think my story is, and a lot of people, maybe you can deal with this with your kids. I evidently had attention deficit disorder because I kept changing careers as I went along. I graduated from college in 1971. I was drafted into the Army during the military draft, went into the Army, got out, went to graduate school, got a doctorate. And then with my first job, my brother was in law school in New York City, and he said, "Hey, I'm going to these comedy clubs. I think you could do this." And so I quit my job and I moved to New York and I became a stand-up comedian in New York City and did that for 20 years. But the thing about stand-up is you're only working at night. And so I was able to go back to school and do more schooling in the day. So I went to Union Theological Seminary, became a minister. I went to Columbia University and I got a degree in psychology. And I have had a broad career across the board in mental health. And so when this crisis arose, this COVID crisis, I knew, of course, obviously, that there was going to be a lot of difficulty with coping. And so I've been very, very busy, sharing, the body of knowledge that's available to us. There's been a real revolution in coping mechanisms. And I'm very eager to share the latest neuroscience on what works.
Well, that's great because, Dr. Will, I think we're all very social animals. And it seems like, stay at home and being kind of, in our own little bubbles, that's very isolating. I personally find that a little stressful. Do you have any advice for that?
Well, Mark, it's not surprising that you raised that because what I've been doing at Purdue with my colleague Glenn Sparks, and this is really, I think, and you raise an important backstory to this, and that is that Americans over the past half century have been relocating away from their core family at staggering rates, okay? And so what happens is that people move, and we move for, jobs or career or climate or whatever, and oftentimes with, the love of our life, and we have little families. But the nuclear family has basically replaced the extended family. Now, the way we describe this in our world is, let's say my wife, who's a retired school principal, and I came over to your home this weekend, and we're sitting in your kitchen table, and we're just getting to know each other, never knew each other at all. And imagine if I get up and I walk over to your refrigerator, and I open it up, and I start looking around in there. Well, that would be just a little bit of a breach of protocol. Now change the scenario, and Mark, I'm your uncle. I'm a cousin. Kat, I'm an uncle to you. The move would still be perhaps abrupt, but it would be a little less shocking for us to assume that as family, you want me to feel at home in your home. What we call these, and this is part of our best-selling book, is we call this the idea of how many people who are in your life every day, not just nuclear family, but people you see, work with, etc., have refrigerator rights in your home. In other words, they can go into your fridge without asking. It's, they can go into your medicine cabinet. It's the story from sociology that has psychological wallop between moving and technology, which distracts us from repopulating our life. I know this is all a mouthful, but it is the story, the psychological story of America over the past half century. We have stripped ourselves of the kind of familiar or community engagement in population that the research shows is critical to keep your mood stable. So, Mark, when you talk about that you're really feeling, as so many are, the absence of people engaged in your day-to-day life, that's the story. Now, bear with me. The addendum to this is that when a crisis comes like this, well, you're not going to all of a sudden be able to kind of repopulate your life on a day-to-day basis, the pandemic
Right.
and just not having it. But there's also an enormous amount of research, neuroscience, on how you cope in the meantime to keep your anxiety low. So that's what I'm going to really be talking about.
So, I mean, how do you establish those connections? As you said, people are distant. They're stay at home. I mean, are there certain things that we find as humans more fulfilling than others
No
in
question.
establishing connections?
One of the really cool researchers who I've gotten kind of locked onto is Dr. Susan Pinker from Canada. She's a psychologist. And Susan got really interested. You'll love this anecdote. She got really interested in why in some places in the world, they call these blue zones, where the population seems to live a very long time. I mean, past 100. Why is that?
Right.
And one of them was in Italy, this village in Italy, and she went there and she said, "Well, what's going on there? I mean, are they vegan? Are they gluten free? None of that." The answer to it, her research said, was they had, Mark, you'll love this, village life. Village life. Now
Okay.
let's
Not
say
just olive oil, right?
yeah, well, exactly right. So, in other words, let's say the three of us and our families lived in a little town, and we lived in the town and worked in the town. And whenever we came out of our abode every day, virtually every face was familiar to us. Okay, you never have to feel even the most subtle on guard. And that's kind of the secret here about when you're around strangers. You have to be, whether you're cognizant of it or not, you're just a little bit more alert about who's around you in your surroundings. When you don't have to worry about that, I've been working on, I'm the trauma specialist for law enforcement in Indiana. And so I'm certified in post-traumatic stress disorder. And I can tell you something, as complex as that issue is, and I'm happy to talk about that, the end of healing from trauma is to feel safe. So think about what we're talking about. How do you repopulate your life with people with whom over time you feel safe? You can do it in your neighborhood. You can do it in a faith community. You can do it in your workplace. I hope, you go to your workplace, and if you're around all of your people, there's a diversity of personalities there, complicated. But over time, you learn to live close in with all of these people. That is what sustains you physiologically over time.
That is really interesting. So
Yeah.
that sense of community brings that comfort and safety, which then, eliminates or de-stresses you. That's really interesting.
Well, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, and I was, so the community's there. And then I was also curious, just as an individual, are there certain things that we should be doing? Like, for example, I'm always told to eat right and get sleep. I mean, is that something that is important in this arena?
No, that's true, Mark. Really, most people kind of are aware of the fundamentals. Whether you make them a habit or not is up to the individual. But here's something to think about. Think about this. We know in psychology, we know more about anxiety than any other psychological challenge. Think about that. Anxiety and depression. Now, I want you to kind of visualize something. Think about a spectrum. And on one end, when you feel very low, that would be depression. And you just basically check out in an extreme way. That's very dangerous. We have record numbers of suicide and depression in America, for example, and in the world. Now go to the other end of the spectrum where you're kind of more amped up and you have anxiety. And that too, when it gets unchecked, goes all the way up to a panic attack. When you're at those two extremes, your system shuts down. Okay, now think about yourself. Think about where you are. Two of you are highly functional individuals. But think about a needle on a graph that would show you where you are in that spectrum. You're functioning, so you're somewhere in a stasis in the middle. Now, one of you may be a little bit more anxious, and so in stressful times, you kind of you kind of tip a little bit more anxiety. Or some people kind of withdraw and pull away and they go that way. What we're talking about are strategies to keep you centered in your comfort zone so you don't go off into a more extreme form. What I'm experiencing during the pandemic is that more people are struggling with the unknown and the anxiety. Although there's still a lot of, depression and withdrawal. And so anxiety has a variety of techniques that are really amazing. Now, I was trained, at a Columbia University, and I was trained in classic Western psychological science, and it's great. In recent times, for anyone out there who has been to therapy, a new therapist, they know that the treatment du jour is actually what's called cognitive behavioral therapy, which is helping you manage symptoms. Doesn't mean that your past is irrelevant. I mean, if you've had a trauma in the past, yes, that's relevant. But basically, we're trying to give you techniques that help you to stabilize your mood so that you're functioning and happy. And here's what we know. If you point to your forehead, that's
Okay.
that's the frontal cortex. That's the noisiest, most annoying part of the human brain. It never shuts up. It's constantly spinning with tales and stories and worries. Now, here's the thing.
Kind of like my 6-year-old.
Exactly right. And so what happens is when the frontal cortex is running amok with, oh my God, with the what if stuff. Oh, what if this happens? Or what if I don't do that or whatever? There's something that we now, can tell people is those thoughts, and don't underestimate what I'm saying. Those thoughts are just thoughts. They're not real. They are not real. They're not formally predictive. They're thoughts that you've created in your head. So the answer, evidently and quite obviously, is to stop those kind of thoughts that are not real, unless they really are real. And almost always they're not. Worried about, the next, whatever it is, test or the next exam or the next meeting or the next judgment or something like that. To worry about that is useless. And so as cliche as that sounds, is being in the moment. And all of your listeners they've heard this before. Living in the moment is where you ought to be. Oh yeah, sure. How? Well, I'm telling you how. And so here's what's really been interesting. The 1990s is called in my field the decade of the brain, decade of neuroscience, where brain scanning, Mark and Kat, got so easy and acceptable and available that we were able to, I say we, the scientists were able to look at how the human brain is functioning almost in the moment and the changes that can happen very quickly. Now, you might have heard of mindfulness. Now, some people hear mindfulness and go, oh, brother, what is this, some Eastern quirky thing? And I urge people to get past that stupid bias because it is not what that image gives to them. It's simply taking in strategies from other systems that work within Western psychology. And specifically what we're talking about is telling your frontal cortex to shut its yapper. That's all it's doing. Okay. So for example, when you're worried and you're having anxious thoughts, how do you interrupt that? Well, the techniques that work reliably are any strategy, physical strategy that interrupts thinking. And those are breathing. Deep breathing is profoundly underestimated in the West, although it's catching on more. Deep breathing stops your thinking because when you're focusing on your breathing, you're not thinking about those thoughts. It stops the train of your thoughts. It is so profoundly effective that I don't know if people know this, but it's used in the military with the Navy SEALs. Think about that. In the Navy SEALs who have to go after what they're doing, deep breathing is a fundamental part of the strategy to get them ready to engage in what they need to do, not worry about what they're going to do. Think about how critical that is. Okay.
So is meditation part of that or can be part of that?
Absolutely. All of those terms, Mark, which are out there in the culture. And again, I'm urging people to go underneath the cover of the rhetoric to say, meditation and breathing and even walking outside and getting connected and refocusing are all part of the strategies that have the effect of stopping, even if for a time, your thinking, which is elevating. Now, I don't know how many people have heard. Are you guys familiar with the amygdala? The amygdala is something that us therapists really love to talk about. The amygdala, it's just a Greek word that means walnut because it's a part of your brain, and you probably have heard of this, that's considered like the alarm system for the brain. It's the most ancient part of your brain evolutionarily. And so, our ancestors were chased by a panther and they ran. And then the next time they hear a rustle, they start running. It's what causes fight, flight, or freeze. You've heard about this. The thing about the amygdala is, hear my words, it's relatively stupid. It only ignites with associations. Think about how profound that is. It's only with associations. So, for example, when in fact you encounter some experience and the amygdala says, uh-oh, I remember this, what this is like, and it sets off the alarm, whether the alarm is valid or not. Working with post-traumatic stress disorder, for example, soldiers who were in a military experience where they experienced really horrible things, come home, and then the slightest encounter with something that has nothing to do with the original scene, but causes the amygdala to be reminded of a look, of a smell. I'm going to say something that's a little bit kind of hard to hear, but for example, working with firefighters, they will tell you that when they're new and they've been through fires where there's fatality, they have a hard time, bear with me, going to a barbecue. Now think about that. Think about it. It's a grisly primal thing, but it's the amygdala saying, oh, I remember this smell, I remember this sight, and they have to go past that. So all humans are constructed this way. It's been profoundly helpful to me working this knowledge to unpack this, working with first responders who are very vulnerable to all of these associations all of the time. And so anytime people who are in a car accident, I was working with a woman who was in a terrible car accident where she was a passenger in the front seat. So she survived it. For years afterwards, she would have anxiety attacks when she was asked to be in the passenger seat of a car, no matter how safe the experience was. We all have these in small and large ways. Let me just say this, and I'll let you guys talk for a while. The thing with trauma is sometimes when you hear trauma, you think of what they call the big T trauma, the big giant ones. But no, basically, you know what the definition of a trauma is? It's a threat to the system in a relative condition of helplessness. That's psychologist Robert Scare. It's a threat to your system where it makes you feel like you have to defend yourself, whether it's real or not. And all of us who have the human construct are vulnerable to this. It's fascinating stuff, and it's a real revolution in science.
It is. I'm really intrigued by the notion of using breathing to center and to be in the moment. I think I know personally, I have a tendency to look towards the future.
Yep.
And when the future is very uncertain, that causes that anxiety. So what other techniques besides deep breathing can we use to get back in the present, in that moment?
Mark, I guess what I would say is that a lot of people hear I should do breathing, but they don't know why they're doing it. They just hear that it's good for them. So if you go back to what I said, when you think about breathing with a purpose, and that the purpose is to interrupt your thinking so that you can make new thoughts, that's its goal. And first of all, the breathing that is most organically helpful is what they call diaphragmic breathing. In other words, take a deep, deep, deep breath, fill your lungs, but it's called belly breathing. Now, you know this. If you breathed right now and you made sure you emphasize that it's filling your belly, okay, not just your lungs, hold it for a few seconds, exhaust it out totally, and do that in rounds of 3 or 4. It's helping your organism, your blood pressure, your heart rate, etc. Guess what else it's doing? It stopped your thinking.
Yeah.
Like I said, that's kind of the dark spot in mindfulness training, is that people don't make that connection. Why am I doing this? Mindfulness basically is refocusing yourself on what's in front of you and recalibrating your anxious or depressive thoughts. There's some really cool techniques. One of them is called GLAD, Glad. Okay, so you're having some anxiety about something that's going on, or you're worried. So you say, no, I got to stop this. And you breathe, or you meditate. And meditation is exactly the same thing. It's basically quieting yourself. You listen to music or sounds, and you stop your thinking. And then when it's time for your thoughts to start kicking back in, GLAD is, G is for gratitude. Just make a little list inventory in your head. What am I grateful for today? Hey,
Right.
you woke up today. It's going to be okay. Your family is okay. I mean, even someone who's not well, they're getting good treatment. So gratitude. L is learning. What have I learned today? What are things that I'm learning or about to learn that are going to help me have a better, more peaceful life? A is accomplishments. Hey, you guys have a laundry list, a long list of accomplishments. I'm so grateful that I've accomplished what I've accomplished in my career as a person, as a citizen. And then D is delight. Let me tell you about a guru in my field. The guy who is the man and the woman, actually, well, the man in PTSD is Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. He's a Danish psychiatrist who runs the Harvard Clinic on Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder. And he wrote the book, The Body Keeps the Score. And this guy is basically the biblical guru of trauma. And guess what he says? Now, here he is, a practicing psychotherapist, psychiatrist, and he said, do you know what works best as a beginning treatment for trauma? Get this, yoga.
Yoga. Okay.
Yoga. Because yoga it's movement, but it's rigorous enough, but it is stretching and is focused on mind focus, right? You're focusing on every single move, as opposed to just doing reps in a gym where you can do that unthinkingly. And so you can imagine the reaction I get with police officers when I tell them to do that. But I have their trust, and they kind of are persuaded. But yoga, and the other thing that's and meditation, of course, and breathing, he recommends. But then very, very important, and this is a really good thing to know in COVID, is being outside in nature. It doesn't have to be very elaborate. I mean, I just walk a mile in my suburban neighborhood near the campus. And when you take those walks and you're out there, is to be focused and present. Stop your thinking and notice what you're looking at, and try and get in touch with your breathing to the magnificent beauty of the creation. The trees, the colors, the sounds, etc. Take you away from all of that. And then, of course, having a sense of optimism. We will get out of this. It's not going to be forever. It's going to be for a while. It could be a long while, but it's just going to be for a while. And so I am just on a mission to have people cope in the meantime with the tools that are available. Everything I've just talked about is what you can do individually. Now, collectively, when that can happen again, think about all of the things I've talked about that are distractions from your mind, as you were talking, Mark.
Right.
Think about this. It's a year from now, and it's Thanksgiving, and COVID is behind us, and you have a big family or friendly dinner, and all of your peeps are there. Your parents, your grandparents, your nieces and nephews. The chatter and the humor and the laughter does the same thing as meditation and breathing. I mean, in terms of, do you see how logical that is? It takes you right out of the spin. Human beings are the only creatures who can imagine a future. We're the only ones who do that. And sometimes we imagine things in a good way. We imagine things that are fantastic. We're creative. We also spend time imagining, awful things. And that's debilitating. So you can see I'm passionate about all of this stuff. But the good news is there's a deep story about American psychosocial health, and then there's an urgent, emergent story about coping until we can get back. But I hope long-term, we in America get past our refrigerator rights disconnection and move into more collegiality. And, people are doing it like in faith communities. People are doing it, like I said, in work and in other places. But to take that seriously as a health mandate for the culture is really important for our future. The more we're tribal, and cut off from the larger community, the uglier it gets.
Right. Well, Dr. Will, I thought for sure there'd be a connection with your stand-up and your your practice as well. I'm glad to hear that laughing is a key component to being in the moment. So.
Totally. The amazing thing about stand-up is, when I started in 1979, I was at the comic strip, and I worked with all sorts of people who you knew and heard about, Seinfeld, Eddie Murphy, you name them. And many of them went on to be famous, and here I am with you. So anyway, it's we had a ball. And the thing they say in stand-up is, it's not surprising you got up the first time because, I guess, filling the audience with friends can do it. The amazing thing is you got up the second time. What was that experience that would make me want to do this? And I did it for 20 years full time. I loved it.
Well, I like the tip about breathing. Next time my watch tells me to breathe, I'm definitely going to pay attention.
But again, knowing, Kat, that it has a purpose moving forward.
Yeah.
And that's something that sometimes gets undervalued or underestimated.
And Mark, I'm happy to come over and dig through your fridge and help you out in that way.
Awesome. Yeah. I might be bird watching when you do that. But, yeah. So.
Do I have time to share one more anecdote that's very enlightening?
Please.
Sure. Give us another taste of what we're going to hear more of on November 10th.
Here's something that comes right from the psychological understanding of law enforcement and police. Kevin Gilmartin is a legend in policing. He was a police officer in Phoenix for 20 years, retired, and was so amazed at the stress of police officers, which, they die within 6 years of retirement. They have all manner of difficulties with marriage, with addictions, etc. That data. And he became a clinical psychologist and became the guru on understanding what it is that's going on. Now, think about this pretty amazing scenario. Well, actually, pretty mundane scenario. A police officer is in their car, and the radio crackles, and they are off, lights and sirens, and they're off to the races doing who knows what. I mean, it may be an arrest, which is, scary, fight or flight. It could be at an accident, whatever. And so they're all amped up, and they go into their fight mode where their eyesight, the brain takes over, their eyesight's strong, their ears are strong, and they go do their thing that they are trained for. And their training is amazing. The anecdotal asides aside, my experience is they all are trained amazingly to do this stuff. Okay, so then that episode is over. They get back in their car, and they are under the impression, the misconception, that their body returns to homeostasis. It goes from a peak height to just a little bit less. They're in what Gilmartin calls a state of hypervigilance. They are waiting unconsciously for the next event. They never fully come down. Their heart rate and all of that stays up, which is why at the end of their tour at 12 hours, they are completely depleted and have nothing left. They don't know how to pace themselves between calls. Police officers in all manner of situations deal with this. So if you think about that idea that you never feel safe, you never feel that can happen to any of us and all of us when in fact you don't come down to stasis. Think about the village effect when you don't have to be alert or on guard. Now, if the three of us all lived in the same block and we became good buddies, over time, when I came out and I walked past your yard, you walked past my yard, I have no cause, no amygdala trigger to say, who is this? What do they want? It's like you don't go there. You just don't go there. And so you live longer. So let's all live long.
I like that.
Yeah.
Long and healthy.
Yep.
And being intentional about thinking the right things and doing the right things.
Focus. Think about focus.
Yep.
Make focus your mantra.
Well, I can't wait to hear what more you have to share with us, Dr. Will, when you do the presentation on the 10th. I'm really looking forward to hearing more tips and tricks I can use to help me during these crazy times. Well, this has been great, Dr. Will. Can you tell us where we can get more info about you and the research you're doing?
Yes, I teach in the graduate program at Purdue University, but I have a very active website, drwill.com, drwill.com. And there's connections there. And the other thing, and there's a link there too, is I have a pretty active YouTube channel on mental health. There's short audios and videos, I should say, on a lot of these topics that I've talked about. It's free, and you can go there and you can see all sorts of stuff. And I refresh that regularly. So Dr. Will Miller on YouTube or drwill.com.
That is terrific. And don't forget to join us and hear more from Dr. Will on the November virtual event. Thanks so much, everyone.
You've been listening to Let's Get Surety, brought to you by the National Association of Surety Bond Producers. For more information about the NASBP and its members, visit nasbp.org.